So what are New York State Education Department and New York City Department of Ed policies regarding preschool evaluations? Well, here they are for you. In New York City, in the Committee on Preschool Special Education Standard Operating Procedures Manual, again available online, easily accessible, there's one paragraph that says, when assessing children and interviewing families from multilingual, multicultural backgrounds, remember that's not just bilingual. Sometimes in New York we just say, oh, it's the bilingual, that's different. But really, multicultural and multilingual. Bilingual falls within that, but that isn't the only thing. Socio-cultural determinants may impact behavioral responses and reactions to learning situations. And a child's environment and cultural norms are of particular importance as part of the process to determine whether special education services are needed. When we use a standardized test and come up with a single standard score or an age equivalency, we're completely ignoring the fact that children come from different cultural backgrounds and how that might affect their performance. Now, there's not much in the New York City Preschool Standard Operating Procedures Manual about assessments of multicultural, multilingual kids, but there is something that refers to the New York State Preschool Guidelines and the New York City Department of Ed Test Resource Guides. So let's see what the New York City Test Resource Guides has to say. For those of you who have been relying on age equivalency scores, it says the use of age equivalency scores to determine functional level is prohibited. Prohibited. As we know, any of us who've taken a course in assessment, age equivalent and grade equivalent scores are the least useful scores and are frequently misunderstood, even by professionals. This is a quote from the New York City Department of Ed Test Resource Guide from the late 90s. They should not be used to report test performance, and they should not be used as summaries of a student's functional level. It's right there. So this means that disability should not be calculated by dividing an age equivalency score by a student's chronological age. The following is completely contrary to New York City and New York State policies, which is, I hate to say it, common practice. Okay, so people say, oh, I gave the score, I got an age equivalent of 2 years, 1 month, times 100 divided by their chronological age equals 67.56%. That means the child has a 32.44% delay and gets no services, if it's in one area. But if they have a chronological age of 3 or 2 months, they will get services. It's complete bunk. There is no way any test has that much precision. We're going to look at that, even if the tests were valid, reliable, and free of significant bias. But then when you think about age equivalency scores, any of us who have children, or any of us who know children, know that there's no 2 year, 1 month level of functioning. There just isn't. Yet we act as if there is in our professional life. We sort of take on a belief that we know to be completely false in the world of child development. What about New York State policy? New York State, 1990, it's a policy document on limiting proficient children, and it says very specifically, scores obtained from translated tests, but not standard on the child's cultural group, or translated by the examiner during the assessment processes, may not be used as representative of the student's present performance. The information collected and reported should be of a descriptive nature. That's been New York State policy since 1990, over 20 years. That is also true in the New York City policies. The Test Resource Guide says can't use standard translated tests. So let's do a little pop quiz. How many tests used by psychologists to identify a preschool child's IQ are adapted into Spanish or any other language? None. None. There's not a single test of cognition that's adapted into any language. That means any evaluation that's identifying cognition on a preschooler is based on a translated test. And we know from state and city policies, you can't use scores from translated tests to identify disability. Now, I'm not even going near preferred practices. I'm not going near what we know from our assessment coursework in graduate school. I'm not going near what the American Psychological Association says. I'm not going near what the American Speech Language Hearing Association says. I'm not going near what the American Occupational Therapy Association says. Why? Because in a way it's irrelevant. We don't even need to go to that preferred practice standards because we have it right in the federal law, the state regs, policies and guidelines, in New York City, policies and guidelines. It's right here. How many educational evaluation tests? So here's the ed evaluator come in. How many of those to identify a preschooler with learning problems who need to see it, or a special instruction, or even a self-contained class, are adapted into Spanish or any other language? None. There should not be a single test score, forget about age equivalencies, for any test for educational evaluations or psychological evaluations for any language except English. And we'll get to the problems with English in a minute. How many speech and language tests for preschoolers? There are 2, but I'll show you the validity problems in these and the bias problems in these. But there are 2 that are adapted. I don't recommend using either of them for scores, and any evaluator needs to look at the examiner's manual. Any evaluator who's looked at the examiner's manual of these 2 tests will know exactly why I'm saying that. And if you're using these tests, you should have looked at the examiner's manual. Oh, this is just more information that you have to look at cultural backgrounds. It's going to make a difference. If all children are developed in identical ways, then developmental difficulties could be attributed to individual differences alone. But children don't have identical environments. So it's important to review each child's abilities and apparent deficits in relation to the demands of the setting in which he or she is currently functioning and in which he or she will encounter in the future. Very, very simple. Just saying, as we all know, children are not brought up the same. So why would we expect them to know the same things? Yet our tests, that's the inherent assumption on all our tests. Because my child, I'll give you those examples in a short while. Okay. New York State, preschool guidelines, 1997, again available online. Families from diverse cultures may expect different skills to emerge at different ages and may provide different experiences and materials for their children. Typical parent-child interactions and the interactions of children with peer and adults in their same community are different. We can't expect them to be the same. And if we're looking to test them based on our own experience, we're already in a very serious biased approach. One thing that the test resource guide says is that in preschool assessment, you have to use clinical judgment. Why? Because there's this wide range of variability. So an evaluator has to know what typical is from the children in the community in which this child comes from. You have to have strong clinical judgment. Without that, let someone else do the evaluations. It's right in our policies, New York City policies. So as you go forward, you might want to think about if, as you're trying to change how you're doing things, look at these exact quotes and use them. Many of you have been doing quality evaluations and doing a great job. Another bunch of you actually know how to do quality evaluations, but think that you can't in New York City because of the way people are saying you have to do it. You actually can and need to do quality assessment. We all have a state license, and no matter what someone on the ground says to us, our state license we hold, and we're given the right to practice, but we need to do it in a way that's competent. And so we actually have to do work that's at a competent level. And doing evaluations and giving age equivalency scores and popping them out and just giving test results, it's not competent.